guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be chatting through my May wrap-up. Now for the month of May, I actually have 8 books to talk about. I do feel like that number snuck up on me a bit. That being said, there were some books I absolutely loved this month, a few misses that I'll definitely chat through, but without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first book I read this month was I Believe in a Thing Called Love by Maureen Gu. This is a YA fluffy contemporary story and definitely the book I needed as a bit of a palate cleanser. I feel like I've been reading a lot of very intense books, and in general I read this after finishing a very long sci-fi novel, so I was honestly looking for something that would be fun and cute and would also be a quick read, and this delivered 100%. This follows our main character Desi, and for the most part she has everything in her life figured out. She's a star soccer player, she dreams of going to Stanford, she's a student body president, she makes fantastic grades, but the one thing she's never really been able to crack is get a boyfriend. No matter the attempts that she makes, something always goes spectacularly wrong. So at the beginning of this book, she decides to turn to a new source of inspiration, and those are the K-dramas that her father loves very much. She decides to marathon a bunch of series to create a foolproof list of K-drama tactics to make the new artsy boy Luca fall in love with her. And so begins a fun YA tale of ridiculous antics, friendship, family, and love along the way. Honestly, this was a bunch of fun. For one, Desi as a main character is super easy to root for. She's hardworking, she's smart, and honestly, her dedication to these K-drama tactics was pretty admirable in a lot of ways, as a lot of them are very, very extreme. I would also caution that going into this book, because this is inspired by K-dramas, expect a lot of different twists and turns, but in my opinion, I thought it created a lot of humor and I felt it was very true to the source of inspiration. Outside of that, I loved the friendship component. The romance was fun and sweet as well, but I would say my favorite part of this book, outside of the main character and the K-drama inspiration, was definitely the family components. I absolutely loved seeing Desi and her relationship with her father. It was just so sweet and just put a smile on my face. All in all, I would say this definitely delivered what I was looking for. I wouldn't say this blew my mind, but I also really wasn't expecting it to. I was laughing and smiling throughout this entire story. Desi and Luca were adorable, and what can I say? I love K-dramas too. So I ended up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. From there, I decided to do a bit of a reread of one of my childhood favorites, and that is the first book within the His Dark Materials series, The Golden Compass or The Northern Lights, depending on where you live. Honestly, this lived up and exceeded my expectations for this first book. This was honestly a lot darker than I remembered. In fact, I'm actually kind of surprised this didn't scare me as a child growing up. Just the journey and also the outcome and the violence that's present in this story was very, very intense. Reading this as an adult though, I will say I loved it so much and I cannot wait to continue on with the rest of the series. I feel like the politics and the intensity is going to continue to grow. And in general, I really love a lot of the dialogue that Philip Pullman is presenting within this story, but The Golden Compass basically follows our main character, Lyra, and she has essentially lived and has been raised in this college her entire life. This is set in this sort of fantastical alternate world that is similar but different to our own. In this world, religion and religious figures hold a lot of political power. On top of that, there's also some fantasy sort of steampunk inspired technology. There's zeppelins, there's also kind of magical items that are used throughout this series. Overall, the actual setting and ambiance of the story is just so spot on, and you're traveling through a lot of different locations as well. As we're following Lyra, she's going on an adventure to save her friend. But essentially at the beginning of the story, children are going missing and people don't really know why. And one day, Lyra's best friend Roger is kidnapped, so she decides to go off and try to save him. Through her adventure, as well as through her eyes, we learn more about different political organizations that are all vying for different types of power, and we also begin to learn who we can and cannot trust. Honestly, this was very political and full of twists and turns. I would say very intense, violent. There was a lot of action scenes, a lot of political intrigue, as well as just so many interesting side characters that were introduced. There was honestly some moments in the story that had my heart racing. Going in, I really did not remember much at all. So a lot of things definitely caught me by surprise. Lyra as a main character, again, is so easy to follow. She's absolutely tenacious and fearless, and the perfect perfect type of protagonist for this story. She's definitely the kind of girl who will jump first, ask questions later, and her bravery absolutely shined within this story. I can see why she was one of my favorite characters growing up, but all in all, this was a fantastic start to a reread of this series, and I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read another fave, and that is A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. This is the first book to a space opera series and actually won the Hugo Award last year, and I loved this book so much for so many different reasons, and the more I sit with it, the more I'm falling in love with the characters and the world. Everything just felt so intricate as well as very, very personal. But this essentially follows our main character Mahit, and she is from a really remote and independent space station. In her space area, there is one central power called the Empire, and they are a colonizer, and they're constantly trying to reach and expand their borders. And that is why Mahit's position is so important, because she's actually an ambassador to the Empire. At the beginning of the story, she's about to start her new role, but once she arrives at the Empire, she quickly realizes things are not what she seems, particularly because her predecessor is now dead, and no one will tell her if it was murder or not. This book combines elements of political intrigue, a thriller, as well as intricate politics that are just unfolding on every page. This book is paced so quickly. I mean, obviously we're following Mahit, who's thrown into a new position, basically trying to solve the murder of her predecessor, stay alive, and possibly stop a war that feels inevitable. The course of this book takes place over the span of like 4 or 5 days, so when I say the pacing is wild, I truly mean it. I don't think our main character sleeps throughout this entire story. On top of that, encountering the Empire through Mahit's eyes is absolutely fascinating. She has grown up kind of in love with this place, but it's also a place that doesn't really accept outsiders, and their culture is also one really hard to assimilate with. Essentially, on the Empire, they greatly appreciate like poetry and song, so their language is really complicated, as well as like socially how they interact is also very interesting as well. So a large component of this book is just trying to figure out the Empire as a culture, and I personally loved that. I thought it was just so interesting to encounter this new place, as well as learn more about Mahit's space station too. They have some really distinct aspects to their culture as well. Not to mention, there are aspects of the Empire you quickly realize don't really add up. There's a lot of internal unrest, there's different factions vying for power, and overall things are absolutely out of control right when Mahit lands in this new place. One aspect of the story I also really enjoyed was how political it was. Obviously, Mahit being an ambassador means she's really well versed in things like verbal sparring. A lot of the individuals she's facing on a day-to-day basis are as well. This isn't really a political-based sci-fi novel with a lot of combat. It's really much more about verbally navigating yourself from room to room, and every conversation seems to have so many layers, and I was constantly just trying to read through all the hidden meaning in every interaction, and it was just amazing. I could not put this book down. It was breakneck. Half the time I was just trying to figure out what was going on, and ultimately I found this story to be so satisfying, so engaging, and just really put my brain through it, if you know what I mean. All in all, I gave A Memory Called Empire 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm very much looking forward to picking up the sequel. It was just absolutely a wild ride. Next up, I was craving a bit of historical fiction with a dash of fantasy, which is always one of my favorite genres. So I decided to pick up The Library of Legends by Janny Chang, and this did not disappoint at all. This was an absolutely mesmerizing journey from beginning to end. This story is set in 1937, and when Japanese bombs begin to fall on the city of Nanking, our primary main character, Hu Lian, and her classmates are ordered to flee in the countryside of China. However, they're not just responsible with saving themselves, they also have to transport the priceless Library of Legends along the way. You're essentially following these students as they trek thousands of miles through the countryside of China, trying to continue their education by learning more about these legends. There's espionage and intrigue, not to mention our main character Hu Lian begins to see some of these legends almost appear to come to life with some of the other main characters she's surrounded with. Not to mention, Lian is very concerned with reconnecting with her mother in Shanghai. And all in all, this is a journey story of destiny and perseverance, and you quickly just fall in love with all of the point of views you read about. It also, again, has that touch of fantasy as you kind of see some of these legends come alive. And coupling that with a really intense historical setting of the invasion of China by the Japanese, this created a really tense atmosphere throughout each chapter. While each character is trying to survive, but also find hope in everyday life, there's also some really intense political components as well, as these students engage in politics, both communism and nationalism at the time. But at the heart of it, I would say this is a story that follows Hu Lian's literal journey, personal journey, as well as a spiritual journey. It was beautifully written, and I love seeing Hu Lian kind of grasp her own destiny and also her perseverance in getting back to her mother. I also loved how artfully woven in all these different legends and folklore were to the story itself. This was heartbreaking and beautiful, and I really enjoyed it, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed for the month of May is a new YA release that absolutely blew me out of the water, and that is The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan He. This is a new sci-fi, futuristic, thriller, mystery novel centering 2 sisters. Honestly, the synopsis itself is vague, and I'm going to keep my opinions about the story vague. I do feel like going into the story knowing as little as possible is definitely more of an ideal reading experience, because a lot of the fun and a lot of the impact of the story is figuring out what in the world is even going on. But again, this is a story centering 2 sisters, C and Casey, and you alternate from their perspectives every other chapter. C's story is one more of survival. She essentially wakes up on a deserted island with nothing outside of an android to keep her company. She has no memory, she can't even see color, but she perseveres to try to escape this island to reconnect with her sister Casey. Meanwhile, Casey is a STEM genius living in a floating city in the sky. In this world, there have been a variety of climate crises, resulting in the human race kind of struggling for survival. One of the outcomes of this is that there are now eco-cities with a large portion of the population spending a lot of time in virtual reality. Casey herself feels like she doesn't really fit in. She also has a hard time kind of interacting and connecting with human emotion. Since her sister has disappeared, she also feels like she is acting wrong to that particular crisis and is being watched by everyone around her. Much like her sister, she is also determined to locate her. And I would say Casey's chapters is more like a thriller and mystery as she's trying to uncover what happened and what caused her sister to disappear in the first place. This is so much about family and connection, but also has a strong central individual journey. As these sisters do have a complicated relationship with each other, they essentially value their differences in each other and really underestimate themselves in a lot of situations, which I do feel like is something a lot of siblings can relate to. Not to mention, this has a very fascinating setting. I mean, obviously outside of the deserted island chapters that we encounter with C, just this sort of futuristic setting is one really cool to experience through Casey's chapters. In fact, everyone is kind of scored and ranked by their ecological footprint, and you essentially move up in society based on how large of an impact you and your family have had through history. But honestly, I thought this book was beautiful. It was haunting. It's really about 2 sisters trying to find each other. I was personally captivated on page 1, and I truly had no idea where this sort of winding tale was taking me. And as I kept saying in my vlog, I would say this is just as much about the journey as the destination. And don't get me wrong, this book is also very, very intense. It's emotional and intense. It has a lot to offer, and I flew through this book, and I gave this a 4.5 stars. Next book I read this month was another reread, and unfortunately it didn't quite live up to my expectations of what I remembered, but I still overall enjoyed it, and that is Crown of Feathers by Nikki Powell-Preto. This is a YA multi-perspective fantasy story set in an empire that was recently broken apart by civil war between 2 sisters. Previously, the old regime was ruled by a powerful warrior queen and also a phoenix rider. Any person associated with her reign or her power can quickly be indentured in forced servitude or even killed off. And that is the sort of political background that this story opens on. Again, we follow 3 primary perspectives. The first is Veronica, and she and her sister have been on the run from the empire their entire lives. They dream of resurrecting the powerful phoenix riders and hatching their own eggs. They're also animages, which allow them to connect and communicate with animals. At the beginning of the story, there is a lot of tension between these 2 sisters, particularly Veronica's older sister Val tends to be very controlling and emotionally manipulative. There's an event that essentially forces Veronica to separate from her sister and kind of break out on her own. Due to a variety of events, Veronica disguises herself as a boy to be able to join the recently resurrected Phoenix Riders that plan to go against the Empire. The second perspective we follow is a character named Sev, and he's essentially an animage hiding within the Empire's army, and he has been hiding his powers this entire life to lay low and avoid being captured or imprisoned. But during his service, he begins to meet other animages and other individuals kind of moving more in the shadows and behind the scenes. The last character point of view we have is Tristain, and he is the commander's son of the new Phoenix Riders, and him and Veronica cross paths and begin to build a camaraderie as they begin to train with each other. There are definitely aspects of this book I really enjoyed. For one, I really enjoyed all of the characters' point of views, and in general, they were all very easy to root for. I particularly enjoyed enjoyed Veronica and the sort of complicated relationship she had with her sister. I felt that the emotional strain and just the overall intensity of that relationship really provided an interesting background for this story. In general, I wouldn't say I'm a huge creature fantasy lover. It's not usually something I go out of my way to read. And while I definitely enjoyed aspects of the Phoenix Writer training, sometimes it did get a little bit cheesy for my own personal taste, but again, I think that's more to do with the fact that I don't love creature-based fantasy. The conflict overall I thought was well written for the most part. There was a few pacing issues in the middle that slowed down the story. I did really appreciate that at the beginning of many chapters there were snippets of correspondence as well as just additional political context and history of the previous civil war that kind of brought us to this place. And overall, I did think the parallel between the current sisters we were reading from, Veronica and Val, to the sister queens of the past was really, really cool. I did feel like this was very much a setup novel. I feel like a lot more advancement and the politics and the plot is going to happen in books 2 and 3. I am interested in continuing with this series, but overall I thought this was just good. There are a few things I feel like that could have been advanced a bit better to make this great, but I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. And the last 2 books I'm just going to quickly mention as they are carryovers from the previous month. The first is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. I had like 150, 200 pages left of this at the end of April, and I did finish it in the month of May. And honestly, I have no new thoughts or feelings to share here. I basically am standing firm with my initial review from April of a 2.75. I just felt like this book dragged. I felt like it had huge pacing issues, and I just kind of had to force myself to read it at a lot of times. It just felt painful. It just felt prolonged. I wanted it to end, but it's almost 900 pages long and it just never seemingly ended. So yeah, I'm gonna keep this one brief. Rating is staying the same, but I did complete it in the month of May. In an absolute stark contrast to Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I also finally finished Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Now here's a book that is way long, almost 1,400 pages long, that I could not put down or get enough of. Where To Sleep in a Sea of Stars I felt like had unnecessary scenes that didn't really bring the plot forward in any way and could have easily been cut. I could have read another 2,000 pages of this book, and I will be next month when I read Rhythm of War. But Oathbringer was an absolute delight. I say delight in the way that I really enjoyed it, but oh my gosh, this book is absolutely heartbreaking. One thing I really appreciate about Brandon Sanderson's characters in the Stormlight Archives, and this is across all the books, is that I feel like we do get a really intense deep dive into their psyche. And honestly, while all of these people are heroes and really striving and working their best, they all have deep emotional trauma that they're all working through, and they're all very broken, to be honest. And that's what makes so many of their stories heartbreaking, but also makes them so rootable and lovable. Like, there are so many moments I just wanted to give characters hugs within this story, and that includes Dalinar. But Oathbringer is definitely a central Dalinar story. We got to see much more into his past, into his scars, and oh my gosh, was there a lot to unpack there. This is a book that definitely is not afraid to look away from the horrors of war, the horror of decision and violence, and really seeing the character arc of Dalinar I thought was really impressive, and I felt like added a lot to the overall story. And in general, I really appreciate how Brandon Sanderson makes really relatable, emotionally broken characters and giving them an opportunity to still kind of find and accept and love themselves. Like, this book series is as much of a therapy session as it is an epic fantasy story full of war, politics, and intrigue. It has truly it all. But obviously on top of that, Brandon Sanderson continued to escalate this enormous conflict to places that are just giving me anxiety on a daily basis. I'm really looking forward to picking up Rhythm of War. This, I just don't know how we're gonna make it through. What is it, 6 more books? It's a lot. But I loved Oathbringer so much. I would definitely give this 5 out of 5 stars. Still toying if Words of Radiance is my favorite or this one. It's just I love Kaladin so much, so what can I say? But yeah, I thought this was an excellent installment, and I'm really looking forward to finally getting to book 4. Alrighty guys, that is my May wrap up. Let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!